Welcome to the Spring Hills Podcast. Today we are starting a brand new, we started it last week with our introduction, but we are starting the 7 stages today, 7 stages. So this is the Next Steps podcast for Spring Hills small group leaders. Although if you're not a small group leader, you'll still find a lot in this that you can apply to your own life. But over the next 7 weeks, I'm going to be having a guest host takeover. I know. You didn't think that I would ever do that. I've only done this once before, Jerilyn, and that was just for the point to have Andrea and Brennan interview me.
Oh my goodness!
So it still wasn't quite quite the same thing. But so Jerilyn's going to take over the hosting role. I'll still be here, but I'm going to take a back seat and be more of a producer role. I do have a hard time not talking sometimes, but maybe by stage 7, I'll know how to keep my mouth shut. So Jerilyn Wilson will be guest hosting and taking us through the next steps for small group leaders. So each week we're going to be hearing from Jerilyn and one of her special guests consisting of both small group leaders here at Spring Hills Church and also staff members at Spring Hills. Yeah. So today, Jerilyn, you know what? I'm going to let you introduce your special guest. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, this is Nanine, and we love having her on our small group leader team. You just wrapped up not wrapped up completely, but finished 1 week of your Revelation small group that so many ladies have really been loving and enjoying, and it's been fun to reflect with you on that. And then this past fall, Nanine joined our small group for small group leaders, where we sort of took on the task of looking at these different stages together and brainstorming how to identify what stage somebody is in through the means of just having them be a member in your small group, and then how to help them take their next steps, how to prompt them towards the next stage. And so today we're going to be talking about this very first stage in the spiritual maturity journey, which is being a guest. And the reason that I asked Nanine here is because she has just a really vivid part of her testimony where she had the experience of being a guest in a church setting. And so before we dive into that story, I just want to remind everybody that the first 2 stages of the 7 stages are guest and seeker, and they are both pre-Christian stages, you might say, that these people have not yet committed their lives to Jesus. They have not yet affirmed that they agree that the gospel is true. But a lot of times people make the big mistake of assuming that guests are seekers. So a guest is somebody who has little to no experience with God and who he is, or they are very passionately against him. They may have had bad experiences with the church or anything like that, so they have no interest in getting to know him or ask questions. And then a seeker is somebody who is seeking more information, seeking more understanding about God. So with that definition on the table, Nanine, I wanted to just invite you to share the story that you shared with me this fall about your experience as being a guest in a church setting.
It was about 20 years ago, and I was newly married, been married about 6 months, and my husband, we were living in Petaluma, asked me if on a visit to Florida we were getting ready to take, if I would be willing to go to church out of respect to his mom. And I said, absolutely, I would go. But I had no desire to go. I had no idea what that meant, and I really wasn't interested, but I did ask him, what should I wear? And he said at that time, probably something nice. So it was a Sunday morning in hot, sunny Florida, and we go into this great big Church of God out of Indiana in Sarasota, Florida church, and there's a guest speaker. And I'm sitting in this pew, actually pushing back my cuticles.
I'm literally doing this right now, Nanine. I'm not joking.
I'm just kind of going, I'm looking at my nails thinking, I really need a manicure. And they have this hellfire and brimstone preacher preaching. Okay, so to give you a little bit of background, I'm an artist. I've been self-employed artist for 30 years. And I was, at this time in my life, almost 20 years ago, I'm pretty arrogant about my art. And I have this big thing about artists who don't capture the light in their work, whether it's photography, painting, whatever. I'm really arrogant. I'm a street artist. I'm not sure what I had to be arrogant about out on the street, 40 times a year selling. But I would walk these shows and I would be like, another artist misses it. And okay, so that's an important part of this story, my arrogance about light and capturing it. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, this preacher is up there, and he is waving his arms around. He's kind of yelling. I'm thinking, like, dude, chill a little bit. And all of a sudden, he says something about the light, and it catches my attention. And I stop pushing back my cuticles, and I look up. And he goes on to say how light makes the darkness flee and how God is light. And the most amazing thing happens to me sitting there, me with no interest at all in this. I sit up and I take notice and I begin to listen to what he's saying. And after about 15 minutes, I begin to shake all over. Now, this isn't going to happen to everyone. This is just what happened to me. And at that time, I had no idea what was going on, and it totally freaked me out. And I lean over to my husband, Mike, and I said, something is happening to me here. And he just looks at me and says, do I need to take you to the ER? I said, no, I'm shaking all over. I don't know what it is. But I think when we get back to Petaluma, we need to find a church to go to. And he looks over at me and says, praise Jesus. And I look at him and say, what? What is going on? So that was that story of that day. We ended up going out to have lunch with this visiting pastor. I don't know how. His mom was very, very involved in the church. And I remember I had to really be on my best behavior, but this whole time, this shaking thing is still happening. And I can't say anything to anyone except to Mike. And little did I know that this is what Mike had been praying for, even though I did not know that he prayed. He never told me. He kept it secret. He did not go to church. He had walked away from his faith for 25 years. And that's that story.
It's so good, Nanine. I think that helps me just so often when I've been talking to other people about the guest stage, just imagine what it would have been like to be sitting in church with literally just no interest. People sometimes just assume everybody's there to come and experience the sermon and get to know people and stuff like that. But yeah, it's more often than I think we're aware that someone's there because they're pleasing their mother-in-law or because they just didn't want to create a wave in the family events of that weekend or whatever. But I think it's really cool because your story is so unique in that you went from a guest stage to basically a new believer stage in almost an instant, which is so, so beautiful. But I also love it helps me visualize for some people who spend a longer amount of time in the guest stage in the church, what it might be like for them and how the way that we treat them and interact with them could be either very helpful or maybe in some cases harmful to their ability to become seekers or new believers like you did. And so the first thing I guess I wanted us to discuss, like we did in our small group before, is how do you identify a guest? Like what are little things that maybe as a small group leader, if you had someone that you eventually were like, oh, I think they're in actually a guest stage, not a seeker stage, what kinds of things would indicate that to us as small group leaders as we're interacting with people, do you think?
Well, hopefully they're willing to ask some questions and not be shamed by these questions they don't have an answer to. And I think that we as small group leaders can encourage that by telling, from the very get-go. First, everything shared in small groups stays in small group.
That's good.
Okay, it doesn't go outside of that. And the other thing would be, too, is just to foster that, to say, never be afraid to ask a question. There's no wrong question here. And then as small group leader, to be in prayer all the time, even when your mouth is moving, that if someone has a question, that God would, the Holy Spirit would give us the ability to give an answer that is not a put down or like, oh man, that's stupid or whatever, an answer to them that is straight from the Spirit out of our mouth to them.
Yeah, that's good.
To identify them, that's usually, hopefully, they identify themselves right from the get-go. I find that most people want to let you know, hey, I'm here.
Not because I want to be. No,
right.
no.
I didn't want to say not because, but I mean, like, who joins Revelation and, doesn't want to be there? But actually, I'm thinking of someone who I think is a fairly new believer in this, in my class, the second go around. They usually identify themselves. They want you to know who they are.
Right. Depending on their personality, a lot of them, there's not something they're necessarily ashamed of. And they're just even out of courtesy being like, honestly, I'm just here for the golf. Like this isn't, it's cool that we have the little spiritual time with this small group, but I just want to make friends and get to know you. And then also the people who might feel, like you said, creating a safe space to ask scary questions. People who aren't even asking questions yet, depending on their personality, might kind of just fly covert the whole time. So I think we talked a little bit this fall about how important it is to create space for people to share their story and for you to share your story and sort of just start to get to know people, because I think the most important thing is just that we don't assume anything. Just don't assume that somebody is a believer or that they're actively seeking God. Wait until you have the indication that that's happening, or maybe wait until someone is like, just being honest, I have no interest in the Bible stuff. I'm just here to hang out and have a good time type of thing.
And a lot of times those people, when you guys have been talking about this, those people, sometimes they say, I don't have any interest in this. That doesn't close the door to a relationship with that person.
Right.
Which, I've seen it happen in the past too, where I form a friendship with somebody and it could be years before they actually even come to church again or something. But, I play basketball with them now or something. And I just, Nanine, you're talking about light. Well, we want to be that light to people, right? And so you can be a light to that person, even if you're only, even if they're only at church once. I mean, you still build a relationship with these people because you don't want to give up on them becoming a seeker. You might have identified that they're a guest and that I'm here because my mother-in-law really wanted everybody to be here for Mother's Day or whatever it is, right? But I'm really bummed that I'm missing the football game, whatever is happening. And then you kind of like, oh, you like football, like and then you start a friendship with this person or whatever. Totally. Which I think also, speaking to small groups, is there's a lot of small groups that are very hobby based, and sometimes that's a way that you can get these guests to become a seeker, is by bringing them into this safe space where it's like, I had a basketball group where I had half the group, they're guests. They're non-Christians. Some of them had never gone to church until they joined our group because of a friend. And then we'd invite them to church every week. And a couple of them came, during the Easter, the small group year, the spring year, Easter time or whatever. They come to church and they check it out. And that guest is still there just to, whether it be nice to the person that invited them or whatever. But those seeds could be planted there.
And I think it sets, understanding that this stage exists, sets small group leaders up to not feel discouraged, because I think we have this idea sometimes as small group leaders that if we get somebody into our group and we realize they're not Christians yet, that success or failure for us as a leader is whether or not they become a Christian within our small group semester. I got 13. And then they think of it as a failure if that person is still in their stage. But really, for people who are in the guest stage, apart from a really miraculous thing that happens, like in your story, Nanine, which obviously so many seeds laid the groundwork for that. I love just other parts of your story that I know too that laid the groundwork for that. But a leader could be a part of that laying of seeds where they, just accepted and, like Garett's saying, became friends with somebody who was in a guest stage, so that guest learns, okay, this person loves God and is okay with spending time with me, even though I very clearly don't, or I don't even think he exists or whatever.
Right. And I think my role, honestly, that God has put me in is a planter of seeds.
Yes.
I have not really been blessed to, go out and make disciples of the nations, but I know that I can look back at all the seeds that I have laid down, not even knowing if anybody would, if it would grow, but just putting it out there and hey, whatever. And then down the line, sometimes finding out that it did happen and sometimes it didn't.
Yeah.
And, but I just feel like that's what, and it's not a cop out. I just think that's where God has placed me, and that's what I do.
That's good. That's
So.
good.
I grew up as a pastor's kid. So I grew up in church, had the gospel shared with me constantly growing up. I accepted Christ as a kid, but didn't become super serious about my faith until later on. And the seed that was planted for me was there's a guy at our church that happened to be the mayor of our town. And it's a larger town, 90,000 people or so. And I was graduating 8th grade with 1,000 kids. And he's at the graduation because he's the mayor. But as the kids are walking up, they're each getting handed their little, whatever the 8th grade equivalent of a diploma is, their little folder or whatever it is. And, they've got up there the dean of students and the principal, and they're handing us things. When I get up there, Kurt made the principal step aside, and he handed it to me. Now, I knew Kurt, but I didn't know him that well. He barely remembers this. But 5 years later, or 6 years later or something, I'm at his house because I'm friends with his kids. I'm at his house hanging out, and I was in a spot in my life where I'm just like, I'm making bad choices, nothing too bad, but I need to get my life together before it does get too bad. And I went to him in the kitchen. I said, Kurt, can I talk to you for a minute? And ended up, Kurt became a very good friend of mine, a mentor. And I shared with him, I'm like, you stepping up to hand me that was something that I just thought, like, I want to be like that guy. And so Kurt's always been this guy in my life that I've looked to be, just as like a model of like, this guy, he's an amazing husband. He's an amazing father. He's an amazing just man of God. And like, he's a great businessman and like all these things. He's just like this great mentor to me. And it was all started. I look back at that and I remember thinking like, you know what? Kurt took the time to step in and hand me my little 8th grade diploma. And that was literally in my brain when I was walking into the kitchen to be like, hey, would you meet with me and talk to me about even like my finances? Like, I want to get that together and just things like that. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And then he was one of the officiants at our wedding. He ended up being the one that did the, what did he do? He did the rings, I think is what he did.
That's cool.
So,
that's cool.
Yeah, small seeds are planted and you may not even know it, is my point.
And the beautiful thing of your story right there is how Kurt was obedient to what God called him to do in that moment.
He probably didn't even know why he was stepping up there to hand me that thing.
So good.
Exactly. And that's how it works, though. Those obedient moments are not always ones we remember, but he just knew he was supposed to and he did it. And it was that small little act that made all the difference for you.
Yeah.
Just like that pastor that was preaching up there, he has no idea. He planted that seed. And if he could see the tree that it is today, and I'm not saying that I'm like all holy or anything, but God has taken me on an amazing journey, a journey of, awareness of who he is, and has worked it out in my life in a way that never, ever did I dream. And not only has he worked it out in my life, he's allowed me to help my adult children who I raise my children. You do whatever you want, whatever feels good to you about religion. And I don't know what that looks like, but I'm not going to help you along. So they were just like me. And now all but one out of 4 are saved and born again. And their children are saved and born again and go to Christian school. I mean, God did all that
So good.
from this one
From that
guy.
one seed.
And it's a really good example of just an opportunity, especially as small group leaders, I'm thinking, to really have faith that is sure of what it hopes for and certain of what it does not see, because we throw these seeds out and oftentimes we never get to see the seeds, get implanted into the ground and grow roots and grow up. We don't get to see that. And so we're hoping for that, even though we can't see it. But I can't wait for in heaven someday to get to hear, just like
crop.
Kurt, to see the crop, and then to see, like, it's not just going to be the moments where I sat down and prayed the prayer with someone. Those moments are beautiful. I'm not trying to diminish them at all, but we can't let them be the only measurement of our success. That we get to worship God to see these teeny tiny moments that gave people a taste of God's love.
And it's never about us.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So
yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
matter what we see. We just, the commission that he's given us, that's what we walk.
Right.
So if he says, Nanine, be small leader and do revelation, like, seriously, Lord, that's what you would have me do? Like, okay. But if that's what he says, then that's what we do. Right. So it doesn't matter. It's never about us. So we can't think, like you were saying, that, well, I'm not really seeing the fruit happen out of my small group or whatever. I had an unbeliever there. They are still unbelieving at 13 weeks after.
Right.
That's up to God.
Right. Yeah.
That's not up to us, what God's going to do. We just do what he calls us, obedience, in obedience, in submission, in humility, and he'll do the hard stuff for us.
That's such a good point too, because so many of the other stages that we're going to talk about, you identify someone's in that stage, and then we'll have sort of a bundle of like marbles in our pockets type of thing to prompt that person to take the next step, to prompt them to go forward. But the guest stage is a little different, because you don't really say to a guest, like, you should ask questions about God, that's not necessarily, you can say something like that maybe, but really in the guest stage, our prompting for them to become a seeker is literally just giving them tastes of God's love that they might not identify as that, but that God can use those tastes later. And that, I think I wanted to transition just in sort of what it looks like once you've identified someone as a guest, or maybe you're just assuming everybody is a guest until you have contrary evidence. But what does it look like to give people a taste? We've talked some examples of that, but what are really practical things leaders could do to give people those tastes of God? I like the light example. I feel like that was one of the initial steps of you sort of tasting God's love in a way that specifically intrigued you as an artist.
I think that if we're clear on our own moment of salvation, that never changes, number one. And if it does changing, you might need to go rethink that in the sense that each one of us can remember exactly when it happened and how it happened. And I think sharing that with a new or a guest, I'm thinking that if someone would have came up to me and said, do you have any questions about God? I'd have said, oh, no.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't.
And ran.
Yeah.
I would have ran.
Right.
I did. And I think we have to recognize when we could ask them, do you have any questions? If not, hey, it's safe to say no.
Yeah.
But then that's been planted there, and we can say to them, if ever you do, text me. Because text is an easy way. We don't have to have,
Safer.
So text me or give me a call or whatever. I'll meet you. We'll have coffee on a Sunday after church, whatever. Right. Thinking on that myself, it was a slow process for me. I didn't have anyone to disciple me, and I didn't even know what that would have been or who would have done that or what that meant. I think just, again, I'm going to go back to prayer, allowing the Spirit to kind of to guide us. Now, God? No? Okay, well, let me know when. And be in prayer a lot. And then just those questions. I think we have to make it so that it's so safe, which is kind of a word I'm not crazy about, but like so safe
or
that
welcoming, kind of. So
that
like,
it's okay for them to
yeah.
say no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's good.
And that the love is still there.
And I think that gets into the whole idea we can offer people belonging, a sense of belonging before they meet any sort of condition that we have in mind for them. I think just the positive experience of being like, not necessarily I belong to this church family because I'm a child of God type of thing, but just I was accepted and encouraged and welcomed into this group, even though I didn't meet the qualifications that maybe other experiences with God have made me feel like I got to meet that first.
Is that what you mean when you say your conditions that you may have?
Right, exactly. I mean, we're loving them unconditionally in that they don't need to do XYZ before we think of them as one of us, type of thing. Mm-hmm. But I know that we need to wrap it up as there's another meeting that's happening in here soon. But I just really quickly wanted to say one of the things that this curriculum we've been using called 7 Stages says about outreach. They call it the 4 E's of outreach, which is excellence, excitement, efficiency, and effective. And just this idea that for guests, before they're ready to ask questions about God or to learn about what it means to follow Jesus, it's not that you're baiting them in a manipulative way, but you can offer them things that intrigue them in a genuine way to bridge that opportunity to have those kinds of conversations. So just as we wrap up this conversation about guests, I think appealing to people who love great coffee, like offering great coffee from your home can be a really beautiful way to care for guests, or getting excited about basketball or whatever it is. I just want to make sure our leaders aren't underestimating how God can use those connections and those ways of caring for someone that might not feel as spiritual as giving them a Bible or something like that, but are still things that God can use in powerful ways.
And sometimes just building the relationship with them on their turf.
Right, exactly.
Nanine, you could probably speak into this more. Jerilyn and I are both pastors' kids, so I never had the experience of walking into a church and kind of feeling uncomfortable or out of place.
Right.
But that's something that people experience. They don't want to, which is our building is sometimes something that's like people go like, oh, I didn't feel like this. It wasn't intimidating to walk in here because it didn't feel like a church.
Right.
Which I don't know if it's a compliment or what, but sometimes meeting them on their turf, like a basketball court, and just building the relationship there, and then you build the relationship more and more and more. And so I've had a guy one time just be like, "Why are you so like okay? Why are you happy? Like you never seem to be stressed out." And I'm like, "Well, I'm stressed out all the time, but I think I get where you're getting at." And honestly, it's the faith that I have, and I'm start to share with him, and he's kind of like, "Oh, okay," and then he doesn't say anything else about it. And then later on, we have another little conversation, and later on another little conversation, and just kind of the fact that we're on a basketball court just made it easier,
That's good.
I also think one thing that God put on my heart this year to do that I haven't done, I don't know how much of this you would want on this podcast, but is that when one of my members wants me to meet them for lunch or coffee, I'm kind of more like this girl. Mm-hmm. And so
she put a hand out is what Nanine did. She made a hand gesture, pushing away, it looks like. I'm more of a push it away kind of person.
I am a push it away. I'm working on that. And this season, the Lord put it in my heart. If they ask you, I want you to go. Mm-hmm. So I've gone out to lunch with several different people. I normally wouldn't. I don't know, where that goes, but it's always a God-based, and we're talking about God, and they're sharing their testimony, and we have it.
That's so good. That's
awesome.
So good. Well, thank you so much, Nanine. I just had a moment, am I saying your name correctly?
Perfectly.
I am? Okay, good. Yeah. I was like,
it's
I feel like
Narnine.
Sometimes.
Narnia?
No, it's Nadine.
We're so glad that you joined us. It was awesome to have you today. And thanks.
And
Garett.
just so you know, we're going to be doing this for the next 7 weeks. You can find this on all of the normal feeds, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can look at it on the Spring Hills app as well. But we are starting a playlist on YouTube, so you'll be able to see all of these episodes just one after the other instead of mixed within some other episodes on the podcast. So Nanine, how was it your first your debut on the podcast?
Awesome.
Awesome. How was Jerilyn as a host?
Spirit-filled.
It was her. It was
She
her
was
debut as a
beautiful.
host too.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you.
She was
I feel
beautiful.
encouraged.
You were great too.
So am I fired?
no, we'll
No.
keep
No.
you.
All right, I'm getting pushed to producer. All right. Well, thank you both for being here and starting to share this new series. I'm excited for it to see where it goes next. And who do we have next week coming in to talk?
Next week we have Doug.
Doug is going to come in
Yeah.
and do stage two.
That's right. Yeah,
which is
Seekers.
the Seekers. So which
That's
we kind
right.
of dipped into a little bit, but
Yeah.
Doug is going to be great to have on. It'll be his debut as well. So we got another first timer. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.